You could smell that reunion before you could see it. I mean that literally. You would be in the back seat of a car, a 1971 Buick LeSabre maybe, or a Ford Galaxy with the windows cracked and the vinyl seats hot enough to brand you, and you would still be a quarter-mile down the road, past the church, past the long field with the broken fence, and suddenly it would hit you through that window. Smoke. Sweet smoke. Hickory and charcoal and something in a pot that had been going since before the sun came up. And before your daddy could even turn into the lot, before he could even put the car in park, you were reaching for that door handle. Because that smell meant only one thing. The family was together. There was one day in the black family calendar during the 1970s that stood apart from all the others. Not Christmas, not Easter, not even the 4th of July, though the 4th was something. No, I'm talking about the family reunion. The one day every summer when the whole extended web of your people, the cousins you saw every week and the cousins you only knew from photographs, all of them, all of y'all, came to the same piece of ground at the same time. Somebody had been cooking for 3 days. The folding tables had been borrowed from the church. The ice chests were packed and sitting in the shade. And the children, Lord have mercy, the children, were about to run themselves into the ground from sunup to sundown. Those reunions were something else. Family. They were something we built with our hands, on a budget that had no business feeding 100 people, in a tradition so carefully tended that missing it was not an option. You did not miss the reunion. You rearranged your life around the reunion. And those traditions we kept inside that one long glorious summer day, the 30 we're going to walk through today, most of them are gone now. Not all, but most. And the ones that have survived, the young ones don't always know why they're doing them. They've lost the reason. They've kept the motion without the meaning. So let me give it back to you. Hey family, I'm James. And today we are going all the way back to the 1970s, to the golden age of the Black family reunion, to bring home 30 traditions that held us together when the whole world was trying to pull us apart. Now, if this is your first time here, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button before we get started. We are building a community of folks who remember and folks who want to learn what they missed. So go on, subscribe, ring that bell, and let's walk back into that reunion together. Now, the way we're going to do this today is we're going to follow the sun. We're going to start at the very beginning, when the first cars are pulling in and the dew is still on the grass. And we're going to walk all the way through that day together, through the afternoon and into that warm evening, until the last family packs up and the fireflies come out. Because a Black family reunion in the 1970s was not an event. It was a world. And that world had a shape. It had a rhythm. It had a beginning and an end, and everything in between was holy. So let's go back. Morning is where we start. Number 1. The 3-day advance cook. The reunion didn't start the day of the reunion. It started days before. Every person who grew up going to these gatherings knows that when you arrived at the site, whether it was a park, a church fellowship ground, somebody's back 40 acres, there was already food that had a different weight to it than the food made that morning. There was a pot of something on a folding table covered with foil that you could tell had been working since Wednesday. Maybe a pan of pound cake that had set overnight. Maybe a tub of potato salad so cold and dense it held its shape when you scooped it. That was the advance cook. Big Mama, or one of her daughters, or the 2 or 3 women who ran the food committee. They had started before anyone else. They had portioned and seasoned and tasted and adjusted and portioned again. They had done the math in their heads the way only women who have fed large families can do math, not measuring cups, feeling. Not timers, knowing. A whole pot of neck bones for 100 people. 3 turkeys in rotation. 7 sweet potato pies cooling on a rack in a kitchen that was already 80 degrees at 7 in the morning. And none of those women complained. That was the gift they gave every year, starting 3 days early before the gratitude had even arrived to meet them. Number 2. The sign-in book. Somebody, usually the family secretary, which was an actual title held by an actual person, usually a woman with an organizational mind that could have run a corporation. Somebody brought a book a composition notebook, or a church ledger, or sometimes a proper hardbound journal they'd bought for this very purpose. And when you arrived, before you could get to the food, before you could even put your dish on the table, you signed in. Your name. Where you were coming from. Sometimes the year you were born. Some families had been keeping these books for a decade by the 1970s, which meant you could flip back to 1963 and see names of people who weren't with you anymore. That book was not a formality. That book was a record. It said, "We were here, all of us, together, on this day." You won't see that today. People take pictures, they post them. They're gone by Tuesday. But that book stayed. That book sat on a shelf in somebody's house all year long until the next reunion called it back into service. Number 3. The greeting line. You did not walk in, drop your dish, and go find your friends. That was not the order of things. The order of things was, you greeted the elders first, before you spoke to anyone your own age, before you ran off with the cousins, before you touched a piece of food. You went to where the oldest people were sitting, usually in the shade, usually in good chairs that had been carried out specifically for them, and you greeted them by name. You kissed the cheek, or you took the hand. You said, "Yes, ma'am," and "No, sir," and you did not rush. And those old folks, the great aunts with the powdered faces and the great uncles who had worked in the fields and the mills and the factories and had the hands to show for it, they looked at you. They looked at you, and they saw who you were becoming. They asked about your grades. They asked about your mother. And in that 30 seconds or that 2 minutes, something passed between you. Something that a photograph cannot carry. That was just how it was done. Number 4. The blessing over the food. It was never the same person twice, or sometimes it was, if the patriarch of the family was still living and still strong enough to stand. But the blessing over the food at a black family reunion in the 1970s was not a quick bow-of-the-head situation. It was a testimony. The person who gave it, and everyone knew who it was going to be before they were asked, because it was always the oldest person present or the most respected. That person did not use short sentences. They thanked God for the ground you were standing on. They named the ones who weren't there anymore. They called out the ones who had made the long drive. They asked for protection going home. They reminded everyone what the gathering was for, as if the gathering itself needed a sermon. And you stood there with your head bowed and your hands folded, and you did not fidget and you did not peek, because that blessing was the whole thing in miniature. Everything the reunion meant was in that prayer. The gratitude, the loss, the continuity, the hope. And then came the Amen. Number 5. The dish protocol. Child, let me tell you something. There was a system for how the food was organized on those tables, and that system was not written down anywhere, but every woman there knew it by heart. Meats on the first table, sides on the second, desserts on the third. And the dessert table was covered and could not be touched until after everyone had gone through the first 2 tables at least once. Your dish, the one you brought, went in its category, and here was the unspoken rule. You did not ask, "Who made this?" You either figured it out from the taste, or you quietly found out later. What you did not do was eat nothing but your own dish. Because the point of bringing a dish was to give it away, not to protect it. If somebody ate all your macaroni and cheese and there wasn't a spoonful left for you, that was not a tragedy. That was the highest compliment you could receive. Back in those days, an empty dish meant you had cooked something worth eating. Now the morning gives way to the midday heat. And with the midday heat comes the part of the reunion the children have been waiting for since they signed in. Number 6. The children's relay races. By 11 o'clock, after the blessing and the first pass through the food line, the children's area was organized and managed and run almost like a separate operation from the adult side of the reunion. Somebody had brought a bag of supplies, a potato sack from a feed store or a burlap bag, ribbon for the finish line, a bag of eggs for the egg and spoon race. These were not purchased party supplies. These were things gathered from around the house or borrowed from neighbors. And those races were not casual. They were serious. The children who had been going to this reunion for 3 or 4 years already had reputations. The fastest cousins were known. The ones who cheated were known. The one who always cried when she lost was known. And the uncle who ran the races, because there was always one specific uncle whose job this was, year after year, he kept the order with the authority of a man who had once run those same races himself and still remembered every time he lost. Number 7. The Spades Tournament. It started right after the first meal. Tables were claimed, partners were decided, and for the next 4 or 5 hours, somewhere in the shade at the edge of the reunion, a spades tournament moved at its own slow, serious pace. Now I want to be clear about something. This was not casual card playing. The spades tournament at a black family reunion in the 1970s had rules that had been established before you were born, and disagreements about those rules could and did last for years. The cutting of the cards, the bidding protocol, what counted as a sandbag, these were matters of deep family doctrine. And the playing of the hand told you something about a person's character that 3 hours of conversation could not. Were they conservative or bold with their bid? Did they signal their partner, or did they play their own game? Did they win quietly, or did they win all the way? The spades table was where reputations were built, and where old scores were settled by proxy, and every family reunion table in the 1970s had at least one. Number 8. The Elders' Corner. They were always there, in the best shade, in chairs that had been placed there on purpose. The oldest members of the family, the ones who had seen the most. And around them, at various points through the day, younger family members would orbit in, sit for a while, listen to whatever was being said, and then move on. But the Elders' Corner was not just rest. It was archive. The stories that got told in that corner, about the family's origins, about who came from where, about the town in Mississippi, or the county in Georgia that the family had left behind, about the man who had been your great-great-grandfather's employer, and what kind of man he was, about the great flood that took the house in 19-something. Those stories only lived in those mouths, and the ones who thought to sit down and listen carried pieces of that story for the rest of their lives. The ones who ran off to play only found out later what they had missed, when those mouths were closed for good. Number 9. The family photograph. There was one point in the afternoon, usually 2 or 3 o'clock when the food had settled and before the heat broke, when someone with an actual camera called everyone together. And this was a production. Getting 100 people organized into rows was not a 5-minute task. The shortest in the front. Sit down. Don't stand. We can't see you. Move left. Move left more. Hold still. The photographer was usually a cousin who fancied himself skilled because he owned a Kodak Instamatic and had read the instruction booklet. But that photograph, when it came back from the drugstore 2 weeks later, was not just a photograph. It was proof. It went into an album. It got passed around at Thanksgiving. It sat on somebody's dresser for the next 30 years until the colors faded to orange and pink. And when you look at those photographs now, family, when you find one from a 1972 reunion in somebody's attic, you are not just looking at people. You are looking at a decision those families made every year to show up and be counted together. Number 10. The homemade ice cream. Somebody, somewhere at that reunion, had brought an ice cream maker, the hand crank kind, which in the 1970s was a White Mountain or a Donvier, a wooden barrel fitted with a metal canister, packed around with crushed ice and rock salt. And one of the older children's jobs, a privilege and a sentence at the same time, was to crank that handle. You cranked, you rested, you cranked some more. And slowly, over 30 or 40 minutes of rotating shifts of children, the custard inside the canister, vanilla usually, or sometimes banana, or sometimes peach if the peaches that summer had been right. Slowly that custard became ice cream. Thick, cold, pale yellow ice cream that did not taste like anything you had ever bought at a store, because the store had not made it. The family had made it, with ice from a cooler and cream from the grocery and vanilla extract and patience. Folks don't do this anymore, and that is a shame. Now let me stop right here for just a moment, family. Before we keep moving through this reunion day, I want to ask you something. What tradition from your family reunion do you remember most? Maybe it was a dish. Maybe it was a game. Maybe it was a person, an uncle, a grandmother, somebody who made every reunion feel like it was happening for the first time. Drop it in the comments. Tell me the name of your family, or the name of the city where your reunion was held, or the name of that one dish that was only made on that one day. I read every single comment, and I know there's somebody else out there whose family did the exact same thing. Number 11. The dominoes game. If spades was the tournament, dominoes was the conversation. Dominoes at the reunion table was where the older men sat all day, unhurried, moving tiles with deliberate hands, talking about everything and nothing. The economy. The church. Who had bought land and who had sold theirs. Sports, but the older kind, the players they had grown up watching. The game moved slow because no one was in a rush. There was nowhere else to be. A man who played dominoes at the reunion was a man who had made his peace with the day, who was not trying to be somewhere else, who was right there at that table with those tiles for as long as the day lasted. That is a posture we have lost. The ability to be entirely present at a gathering without an eye on the clock, without a hand reaching for something to distract us. Those domino tables were, without anyone saying so, a form of meditation, a form of dignity. Number 12. The beauty consultation. Out of nowhere, at some point in the afternoon, a cluster of women would form that had nothing to do with food. A woman would pull a comb out of her pocketbook. Another woman would tilt her head. And right there, at the reunion, amid everything else, somebody's hair would get attended to. A press, a twist, 2 braids fixed because they had come loose on the drive. This was not planned. It was instinct. Women who came from a tradition of caring for one another did not turn that instinct off because they were at a public gathering. If something needed doing, you did it. And the child who sat still while her aunt fixed her hair was receiving something more than styling. She was receiving attention. Focused, unhurried, personal attention from a woman who had loved her since before she could walk. Number 13. The talent show. By 3 or 4 o'clock, somebody had organized the children into a performance. It might be called a talent show. It might just be described as, the children are going to do something. But it was real. There was a section of the gathering that served as a stage, a picnic table cleared off, a patch of open ground, the back of a flatbed truck if the family was in a rural area. And the children performed. One sang a song she had been practicing since she found out about this reunion 6 weeks ago. One recited a poem from school. 2 brothers did a comedy routine that they had rehearsed, and that was only funny to them, but that got laughter anyway, because the effort was visible, and the family watched, not with divided attention, not with one eye on a phone screen. The family watched and clapped and called out by name, and when the child who was most nervous finished her piece and looked up, what she saw was her whole family, all 100 of them, looking back at her with pride. That was worth more than any trophy. That was worth more than any school prize. That was her people saying, "We see you." Number 14. The revival of old songs. Somewhere in the early afternoon, and this happened gradually, the way smoke gathers rather than arrives, the music would start. Not from a speaker, from a person. One of the older women would start humming something. Maybe, "This Little Light of Mine." Maybe something older than that. Something that didn't have a title anyone could have told you. A field song or a church song that had been handed down 3 generations without a hymn book. And another voice would join it. And then another. And soon you had a dozen or 15 voices in rough and beautiful unison, carrying a song that the children standing nearby had never heard before. A song that might not make it through one more generation unless someone leaned in and learned it right then, in the shade, next to the cooler, while the ice was still good. Number 15. The watermelon ceremony. It was always a ceremony, even when nobody called it that. There was a particular moment. It had to be timed right. Not too early, not after the desserts had come out, when the watermelons were brought out. And they were always whole melons. Not pre-sliced, not cubed in a bowl. Whole green melons that had been sitting in ice water since morning. The oldest man present, or the man assigned this task by family consensus, would pick up the knife, and he would cut. Down the middle, the crack of the melon, then into wedges, and the slices were passed from hand to hand, and the children ate them standing up, and the juice ran down arms and chins, and nobody cared, and the seeds got spit into the grass in a contest that nobody was officially running, but everyone was unofficially entering. There was a freedom in that moment that belonged specifically to summer, specifically to outdoors, specifically to being surrounded by your own people. You cannot reproduce that freedom in a kitchen. Number 16. The Family History Lesson. There was always a moment in the afternoon, and in families that took the reunion seriously, it was a scheduled moment, written on a program if there was one, when the family historian spoke. This might be the patriarch. It might be the family secretary. It might be a younger person who had gone to college and had done research. But someone stood up and told the story of where the family came from. Not the soft version, the actual version. This family descends from these particular people who were born in this county, who survived this, who built this, who moved north in this decade. There were names said aloud that some people in that crowd had never heard, towns named that some of the young people had never seen on a map. And when it was done, something had changed in the crowd. They had been reminded that they were not random individuals assembled by coincidence. They were the product of specific choices made by specific people in difficult times. That was a lot of weight to carry, and it was meant to be. It was meant to remind you that you had an obligation to something larger than your own comfortable life. Number 17. The old folks' slow walk. In the late afternoon, when the worst of the heat had passed, the oldest people at the reunion would sometimes take a slow walk together, around the perimeter of the park or the field, just walking, unhurried. 2 women side by side, talking quiet. 3 men slightly behind them. They walked the way people walk when they are not going anywhere specific, but when the walking itself has a purpose. The purpose was to be together, to feel the same ground under their feet, to mark the space with their presence one more time, in case it turned out to be the last time. Because the older you got at those reunions, the more you understood that every one of them might be the last one. That understanding made everything taste different. It made the watermelon sweeter. It made the voices of the children louder. It made you want to hold on to the afternoon just a little longer, to walk a little slower, to be in no hurry at all for the sun to finish its business. Number 18. The fish fry setup. Some families, particularly those with southern roots that ran deep, ran 2 parallel food operations at the reunion. The main spread, and then the fish fry that started up in the late afternoon for people who wanted something hot and fresh. A propane burner, a cast iron pot deep enough to drown in, catfish that had been cleaned and seasoned and laid out on a rack since morning, waiting, cornmeal and seasoned flour mixed in a paper bag. And the person running the fish fry was not the same person who had run the main grill. The fish fry had its own operator, its own rhythm, its own small crowd gathered around it watching the oil work, smelling that sizzle, knowing that what was coming out of that pot in the next 20 minutes was going to be the best thing they had eaten all day. Some of the children had already eaten 3 plates of food and somehow found room for fish. That was the magic of outdoor eating. Your capacity expanded to meet what was available. Now we are moving into the long afternoon, family. The sun is dropping and the evening is coming. And the evening of a black family reunion in the 1970s was its own separate country. Number 19. The farewell plate assembly. Before any family could leave, and there was a proper order for leaving, the families who had come the farthest left first. Before they could leave, they had to be sent home with food. This was not optional. The farewell plate was as mandatory as the sign-in book. Someone would find a foil pan or a set of containers. The host family or the women who had organized the food would pack a plate for you. a piece of meat, a scoop of 3 sides, a piece of cornbread, and something sweet. Every family that had driven 4 hours to be there was going to drive 4 hours home with something to eat when they arrived. That plate was a continuation. It said, "The reunion does not end when you pull out of the parking lot. You take it with you. You eat it in your kitchen, in your house, back in your city, and for that one meal, for those 20 minutes, you are still here with us." Number 20. The children's foot race home. As the afternoon wound down and parents began gathering their things, the children staged one last race. Not organized by adults, organized by themselves, from one end of the gathering to the other and back. And the children who had been running since morning, who had no business having any energy left, somehow found a full tank. They ran like the day was ending and their legs knew it. They ran because the body of a child in the 1970s, not yet connected to a screen or a device, knew that physical exhaustion was the correct way to close a summer day. They ran until they couldn't. And then they fell into the grass or flopped against a tree, and their parents looked at them and said it was time to go. And they were, for once, too tired to argue. Number 21. The photograph trading. As people prepared to leave, they traded photographs, not digital, actual photographs. Wallet-sized school pictures, snapshots from Polaroids, pictures cut from the Christmas card someone had sent over the winter. A grandmother would open her pocketbook and give the visiting cousin a photograph of herself and her husband at their anniversary dinner. A mother would tuck a picture of her children into the hand of an elderly aunt she wouldn't see again until next year. These photographs were the connective tissue of the extended family before the telephone became reliable and affordable, before anything else. They went into wallets and purses and onto refrigerators and into frames on nightstands. They were how you kept the face of your people in front of you every day of the year. Number 22. The passing of the torch. In some families, at the end of the reunion, there was an announcement. Next year's reunion host was named, and the naming was not a drawing from a hat. It was a decision made by the elders, communicated to the family, accepted as an honor and a responsibility. The family chosen to host knew what they were taking on. Months of planning, coordinating the location, managing the food list, tracking who was bringing what. The named family stood up and accepted the responsibility with whatever dignity they had left after a full day in the heat, and the whole reunion applauded, and somewhere in the back of the applause was the beginning of anticipation. Because now there was already something to look forward to. Now the year ahead had a destination. Number 23. The send-off prayer. Before the first car left, just as the light was going golden, someone led a closing prayer. Different from the opening blessing. The opening blessing was gratitude for what was before you. The closing prayer was gratitude for what had just happened. And it was always something more personal, more emotional, more specific to what had occurred that day. Someone had announced a pregnancy at the reunion. Someone had shared a health scare. Someone had graduated or gotten a new job, or come back from somewhere far away. The closing prayer named these things. It acknowledged the full human weight of the day that had just passed. And it asked for safe travels. It asked for protection on every road. It asked for the chance to do it again. Same time next year, God willing. And then they said, Amen. And the cars began to start. And the children who had been put in the back seat were asleep before they reached the main road. Number 24. The drive home recitation. This one is different from all the others because it didn't happen at the reunion. It happened in the car on the way home, and every family did it. Not out loud, maybe, but inside their own silence. Who had changed? Who looked tired? Who had put on weight or lost it? Who was not right and probably needed somebody to check on them before too long? The children in the back seat who were still awake listened to their parents reconstruct the day. Who had been there? Who hadn't? Who had said the wrong thing? Who had said exactly the right thing? Whose potato salad had been better this year than last year? In those 40 minutes or 4 hours of road, the family processed what it had just experienced. They made meaning together out of a shared day, and then they got home, and they put the children to bed, and they sat down at their own kitchen table, and they unpacked the farewell plate, and they ate in the quiet of their own house the last piece of a day that had held 100 people together. Number 25. The reunion committee meeting, held the next morning. By the following morning, sometimes the very next morning, sometimes within the week, the women who ran the reunion were already talking about next year. The food that had run out too early. The dish that nobody had touched. The arrangement of tables that had put the desserts too close to the children's area. The time of the blessing that had been slightly too late in the morning, so some people had eaten before it. These were not complaints. They were professional assessments. The reunion committee, and in most black families in the 1970s, this committee existed in fact even when it had no formal name. These women treated the reunion the way a craftsman treats a piece of furniture. You look at the work. You find what could be better. You plan for it to be better. Because the goal was not to throw a good party. The goal was to build something that would hold the family together for another year, and the year after that, and the year after that. The goal was permanence. The goal was continuation. And then there were the last 5 traditions of the day, the ones I've been saving. Because these last 5 belong to the end of the evening, after the sun goes fully down and the fireflies come out and there are only a handful of cars left. Number 26. The elders' final blessing on the children. Before the oldest people left, before they were helped into cars and driven home or helped to their beds if they were staying close, they moved among the youngest children still present, one by one, or in small groups, and they placed a hand on a head, or they held a small face in old hands. And they said something. It wasn't always audible. Sometimes it was a whisper. Sometimes it was just a look. But every child who received it felt it. Even if they were 6 and could not have told you what it meant. Their body knew. Their nervous system registered it. This was something different from a hug from a parent. This was something that came from farther back than that, from further away. This was the weight of accumulated years pressing forward into a small, soft face and saying, I see you. You come from something. Keep going. Number 27. The clean-up as community. Nobody left without helping clean. Nobody loaded their car and drove off while folding tables were still standing. The cleanup was as organized as the setup. Men broke down tables. Women handled the kitchen supplies and the remaining food containers. Older children gathered trash. Younger children were given small jobs. Hold this, carry that, pick up these cups. The field or the park had to be left better than you found it. Not just good enough. Better. Because you were representing something. Because the person who owned this land or managed this facility had trusted your family to use it, and you were going to honor that trust visibly. The cleanup was character, same as everything else. How a family treated a space when they were finished with it said everything about who they were and what they believed about themselves. Number 28. The last song at the reunion. As the cleanup finished and the last tables were loaded, someone started it again. One voice, and then a few others. Not a planned performance. A release. Blessed Assurance, maybe, or I'll Fly Away, or something that wasn't a church song at all, but that had become a family song over the years. A specific song that only your family sang at the end of the reunion because your grandmother had started it once, and it had stuck. It was never long. 4 lines, maybe 8. Enough to close the day with something shaped. Enough to say that the day had not just ended. It had been completed. There is a difference between a thing that ends and a thing that is completed, and your family knew it. And they honored it by not letting the day just trail off into parking lot noise, but by giving it a closing note. Number 29. The final counting. Before the last car left, someone, usually the family secretary, usually the woman with the sign-in book, stood and counted. Not aloud, necessarily. But she looked at the book, and she looked at who was still standing in the lot, and she made sure the count was right. Everyone who had come had been accounted for. No one had driven off without someone knowing they had been there. This was not a bureaucratic act. This was love expressed as attention. The reunion was not just a gathering. It was a complete world, with a beginning and an end, and the end required knowing that every person who had entered that world was accounted for before it was closed. Nobody gets left behind, not even in the accounting. Number 30. The drive back past the site the next day. This one belongs to the families who lived close enough to do it. The next morning, or the morning after that, somebody in the family, usually one of the older ones, usually one who had felt the reunion in their bones, would find a reason to drive past the site. The park, the church ground, the field. They would slow down. They would look. The space would be ordinary again. Just grass, just trees, just a gravel lot. No tables, no voices, no smoke, no children running. And they would sit with that for a moment. The strangeness of an ordinary place that had been, just the day before, the whole world. And then they would drive on. Because that is what the reunion taught, above everything else. That the people make the place. That without the people, it is just ground. That the gathering is the miracle. Not the location, not the food, not the decorations or the games or the photographs. The gathering. The choosing, every year, to come back to the same piece of earth and say, we are still here, we are still together. We are still a family. That is what those 30 traditions protected. That is what each one of them, from the 3-day advance cook to the drive back past the empty field, was in service of. The continuation of the family as a living thing, as an organism that needed maintenance and feeding and ceremony, the same way a garden needs tending. And when we stopped having the reunions, when they got too complicated to plan, too expensive to host, too hard to coordinate across cities and schedules and the busy lives that modernity gave us, what we lost was not the food, not the games, not even the people exactly. What we lost was the annual reminder that we belonged to something larger than ourselves. The annual proof that we had not scattered beyond recognition. The annual act of showing up and being counted. My granddaddy worked 6 days a week and never once complained. He worked so that one day a year, his people could stand together on a piece of ground and be still, could eat and laugh and pray and cry and play and sing and remember where they had come from. He did not call that luxury. He called it necessity. This right here, this is something we need to bring back. I'll see you next time, family.